As you saw in Just the News yesterday, a remarkable report from the House Intelligence Committee very clearly stating that the FBI had no basis to say that the 2017 congressional shooter was driven by a suicide by cop scheme, and had a lot of basis, which they had for the American people, that he was really driven by liberal ideology and liberal hatred. That is something so important. It took us 8 years to get to the truth, but we're very lucky to be joined by one of the members of that committee who finally got us that truth, Congressman Greg Steube from the great state of Florida. Congressman, great to have you back on.
Yeah, thanks, John. I appreciate it.
The report is so jaw-dropping. It is so obvious that the FBI, for political reasons, gave the American people a very false story for a very long time. You had to pull it out of them like you were a dentist working on teeth, right?
Yeah, 8 years. And if it wasn't for Kash Patel, we still wouldn't have it. And what's insane about all of this is they purposely and intentionally made the investigation classified. It never should have been classified. This was a domestic terrorist who was driven by his political ideology and a far left extremist who wanted to kill Republican members of Congress. He planned it. He did research on who his targets were. In the released report, you saw his handwritten notes of the individual members, their office locations, their descriptions. He had a target list, and they were Republican members of Congress. And if you went through his social media feeds, he was a far left extremist that wanted to kill Republicans. And the deep state hid this from the American people for 8 years, and then they tried to cover themselves by saying it was a suicide by cop theory, even though there wasn't a single uniformed officer on the field that day. So if you wanted to get killed in suicide by cops, there were no cops that he knew of that were there that day. Thankfully, Whip at the time, now Leader Scalise's detail was there, but they weren't in a uniform, so you wouldn't have known who they were. And if it wasn't for Scalise's detail being there, he would have killed a bunch of Republican congressmen that day. And so the FBI tried to make it this mantra of, oh, it was suicide by cop, when the evidence clearly didn't show that. They classified it. They made it classified so that the public couldn't get any of the details of the investigation, even afterwards, or the report or anything. This guy had an escape route planned. He had what he was going to do after the shooting planned out. So how in the world would that be suicide by cop if you had an escape plan to get away from after you killed all these Republican members of Congress to get away from that?
Makes no sense. It's clearly contrived. I mean, the entire story was contrived, and it was kind of obvious when we looked at, like, all right, he only shot the Republicans. Of course there was, but the FBI, the media, for 8 years was able to keep up the facade. Is there a moment now, do you feel like some of these politicalization, some of these fiction creating capabilities inside federal law enforcement are beginning to erode, that maybe the right people are starting to squeeze the right buttons?
Yeah, thankfully we have President Trump and Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard and others that are rooting out the deep state and going after actors in the intelligence community or the law enforcement community, where it should be completely nonpartisan and non-political. And if they are being political and doing these type of things, they should be gone. We called on, and I personally called on Kash Patel. If there are agents that were involved in this investigation that still work for the Bureau, that were involved in basically hiding what really occurred for political purposes, they should all be fired. They should be investigated to see if they obstructed justice, to see if they violated any criminal statutes or federal laws, and then they should be prosecuted. So I would assume, knowing Kash, that's probably taking place. But a lot of these, the higher echelon of the FBI, they've been gone for years. So it's just fascinating that these type of things go on. You have, all the stuff that happened with Russia, all the things that happened with spying on Trump's campaign. And the American people look at that and they say, nothing happened to any of these people. Why hasn't anything happened to these individuals? And it's very frustrating as a member of Congress to fight to get this information. You get the information, and the people that were responsible for all of the decisions get away with it.
Yeah, they walk scot-free and write books and get rich off of their misdeeds. It's really remarkable. There's another element that came out today. President Trump has truthed it out, I guess, on his social media platform. There was a memo written by the Biden National Security Council in June of 2021. It was a new domestic counterterrorism guide, and it changed the longtime standard for the FBI for opening up criminal investigations from a predicate meaning a factual basis for that a crime likely occurred and therefore needs to be stopped or prosecuted, to any concerning non-criminal behavior. And it began giving instructions to FBI agents and Homeland Security agents to be worried about things like xenophobia, like that could be a grounds for an investigation. It was classified. So for 4 years, we didn't know this was the operational standard for our counterterrorism, domestic counterterrorism investigations. Fortunately, the DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, declassified it very recently, and we've been writing about it. The idea that the threshold for the FBI to come after an American now is we just have suspicious non-criminal behavior or concerning, actually that's the word, concerning criminal behavior, non-criminal behavior. Are you worried that that's gone into a civil liberties territory we don't want to be?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we have a Fourth Amendment, we have due process, we have all these constitutional safeguards for Americans' protection, and the Biden administration completely ignored that for, again, political purposes. We all knew it was going on because you had the FBI investigating moms that showed up at school board meetings because they didn't agree with their kids being trans, or all the stuff that was going on there. You had, elderly people that unknowingly just walked into the Capitol on January 6th because law enforcement wasn't stopping them, and they thought that they could go in, and they're being arrested and thrown in jail for all these different things. We knew it was going on, but it's very telling that you now have in writing, and they classified it again to protect themselves. You now have it in writing that they intentionally were going after their political enemies and using different types of search terms like firearms and high capacity weapons and ghost guns and all these different things to specifically go after that type of demographic, because the demographic that is going to go after, it's going to purchase a semi-automatic rifle, is typically not a Democratic demographic. So they specifically were going after their political enemies and using the broad arm of the FBI and the justice system to do that.
Yeah, and a lot of mention, and of course you served so bravely for so long in our military, a targeting of military members. There was a grave concern among the Biden administration that somehow military members were going to become domestic terrorists regularly. That was all throughout the memo. There's a whole section on it and all the different tactical ideas that they were going to pursue. When you look at this, I guess it makes it a little more understandable how the FBI turned out outside of school board meetings, taking down license plate numbers of innocent parents who were just going there to raise concerns about their children's education, or to consider Catholics who go to Latin Mass radicals and potentially extremists. It seems like this memo sends a mentality that leads to those sort of horrific events that we've now known about.
Yeah, and what's crazy is the mainstream media and the left says that, we're making that stuff up and that didn't happen and that's not what was going on. That's exactly what was going on. And they were trying to cover themselves, and now we're getting the real facts. And I think as we get deeper into President Trump's administration, there's going to be more and more information that's going to come out about how much the deep state and the Biden administration worked against the American people in situations like this. They use the justice system, and they're using the justice system now. They know the only way to go against President Trump's agenda with some of these executive orders, especially as it relates to immigration, is file a lawsuit and delay. So they're using it again because you've got a bunch of Biden appointed judges in the district court system that are obviously doing very horrible rulings that they know are going to get overturned when they get to the Supreme Court level, but it slows down the agenda and it slows down what President Trump's trying to get done.
Yeah, it sure does. You have been one of the largest and most important voices when it comes to treating the drug cartels like foreign terrorist organizations, getting the military in potential position to do things. So much progress from the president's executive order to the legislation you've been working on. Your thoughts on where we are in that process, and should the cartels be a little bit more concerned they might one day see a missile with their name on it?
They should be more concerned, but I don't think they are based on their behavior. They're morphing into how they respond to different things. President Trump closes down the border, so now they're using, agricultural products, avocados and tomatoes, and shoving drugs in there to try to get it. So they're moving around their organization to try to react to what the president's doing. But the president should have full authority to engage the military against these cartels. The first step was recognizing them and identifying them as a foreign terrorist organization. I fully support that. I filed a bill that would give what's called an AUMF, or authorization of military use of force, to the president to be able to physically fight against these terrorists who are bringing in fentanyl that's killing hundreds of thousands of Americans, that's trafficking children into our country, that's trafficking humans into our country. We've lost more Americans to drug trafficking and fentanyl overdoses in this country than we have in some of the wars that we have fought in. And yet there hasn't been a focus on fighting against what the cartels are doing. And they're right on the southern border. All of these people are operating in Mexico. They're using precursors that come out of China. And you've seen some talk with Trump going back and forth with the president of China as it relates to those precursors that are being used in the fentanyl. But this is a real fight that is causing loss of life of Americans every single day just by the fentanyl overdoses.
Yeah, so remarkable. Important piece of legislation today. The Defense Act gives local law enforcement the ability to protect stadiums from hostile drones. I think anyone who goes to a sporting event appreciates this piece of legislation. Important thing that you just did a few minutes ago, right?
Yeah, so what's interesting is a lot of people don't realize that we're seeing this all throughout the world right now, where drones are being used for bad purposes. And drones can carry munitions, drones can carry bombs, drones can carry all of these things. And our local law enforcement agencies don't have any ability legally to be able to do anything against them, because it's the federal law enforcement that has the ability to do that. Well, if you're at the Braves Stadium in my district for spring training and there's a drone flying over that has some type of explosive device on it, my local police in Northport or in Sarasota County can't do anything to react to that. And obviously it takes time to get federal officers down there and to deal with those type of things. So my bill would give the abilities of our local law enforcement officers, especially as it relates to stadiums and that sort of thing, to be able to defend against what is now a real threat. You even saw this with the Iranians using drones to attack Israel. So it's a real threat that you're seeing the cartels in Mexico looking at a lot of this stuff and using those type of things. So it's something that we need to be mindful of, and our local law enforcement officers should have the ability to react to stuff like that in real time.
Yeah, such common sense and such an important legislation. Modern times, modern solutions, and you're on the front line of that. One last thing, because when I was a child, my very first dog was a beagle. You fought relentlessly with a few other members of Congress to protect all of those beagles that were going through these horrific NIH experimentations. By the way, no real benefit to humans. You got it done. NIH finally said it done. Your thoughts on your battle and finally getting it done and protecting future dogs from that terrible.
Yeah, again, thanks to NIH and the Trump administration for not allowing dogs to be basically tortured for no purpose. I mean, you hit it. Like there was no purpose for a lot of the torture and the quote unquote experiments that were going on with some of these dogs. So they've been shutting down some of these facilities, and obviously the animals have been released and fostered out. But that's a great step in the right direction. I certainly don't think that government funding should be going to torturing animals for no legitimate purpose. So it's good to see that the administration's acting on that, and we'll continue to move forward with our bill, because I think it should be illegal for the federal government to be doing experiments on dogs. So we'll keep moving forward on that.
So huge, and so many people appreciative across all different political aisles in America with the work that you and others did in Congress. So congratulations to that, sir. It's always a great honor to have you on the show. You're always up to a lot of fun stuff. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks anytime.
Yeah, appreciate you very much. All right.